Welcome to the Block Ops Bitcoin and Crypto Mining Podcast. The third week of December, and with the price of Bitcoin and Litecoin and other mineable cryptocurrencies going down, I thought today would be a good idea to review the best way to improve the efficiency of your mining operations with a focus on power, specifically power and efficiency of the ASIC miners that many of you are running and want to operate at optimum efficiency. Let's talk about that as well as overall efficiency and some ideas about power in general. A lot of people are running Bitmain Antminer S9s for mining Bitcoin. Maybe you have some T9s, T9 pluses, some of the older types of miners. And with the advent of the newer 7 nanometer, it's worthwhile to see if we can squeeze every drop of efficiency that we can out of the older miners. And if you can get like a 5 or a 10% improvement, that is additional cryptocurrency that goes right to your revenue side of the equation. And so when we're talking about mining as a small business, obviously we bring in revenue, which is in the form of mined cryptocurrency. We convert that to the local money that we use to pay our power bills and other types of bills, taxes, pay for the accountant, any payroll, rent, insurance, that kind of stuff. So it's good to be able to offset our revenue with expenses so we can reduce our taxes overall. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to get as much cryptocurrency mined as we can for the power. So let's talk about Antminer S9. So first of all, if you're running these, it's possible to still run these efficiently if you have a good electricity price. But you want to make sure you're doing some basic things to be able to have overall efficiency. And the way to actually measure the efficiency is to see what your hash rate is on the pool that you're using and figure out how much energy, how many watts are being used that you pull from a wall. So you need to have watt meters for that to measure it specifically. You can get whatever the hash rate and the power usage from the machine itself, but that might or might not be correct. So to get the basics of what you need to be able to figure out where you're going to measure it from. We have a lot of these Antminer S9 13.5 terahashes. We happen to buy a bunch of those used earlier this year, so that's the one I'm most familiar with operating right now, although there's a few others that I've done as well. So there is a feature that if you haven't upgraded to the most recent version of Bitmain stock code firmware, is called ASIC Boost. And most tools now support ASIC Boost. That'll immediately give you probably about a 20% improvement in your Antminer S9 mining efficiency. So if you haven't done that, first off, make sure you've got ASIC Boost firmware running. After that, you can start looking at third-party firmware. Third-party firmware has become pretty important to be able to be used, and it comes in a number of different ways. So one of the first ones that I used was the open source Brains software that was developed and put out there by the Slush Pool team. And that one's pretty straightforward to put onto the machines. It helps to have a specific version of the Bitmain factory firmware on there, so the ones that can support SSH, and you can still download it from the Bitmain website, the one that they want. So that's pretty straightforward. And what I like about the Brain software is it's completely open source, so it can be contributed to and reviewed. It has the ability to be accessed on command line because it is Linux based, so you can script some things, and it allows you to choose the specific voltage and frequency of each of the boards of the miner, because every hash board is going to be able to handle different voltage and frequency. Some might be able to handle higher frequency at a lower voltage, and some you just want to get them mining at the highest frequency you can, and you might increase the voltage. Now, overall, if you're using a standard power supply, you really don't want to take the amount of power used above 1500 watts in any of this configuration. Another nice thing about the Brains software is it doesn't care if you're actually running fans or not. So if one or two fans break and you're still in a temperature environment where that allows you to turn the frequency down and operate it, that works great. Recently, I've tried a few other third-party mining software as well. I think there's 3, 4, maybe 5 different types out there. I haven't managed to try all of them, but I have tried a few of them with Awesome Miner that has software built into it that they work with ASIC, ASIC FW, I believe. And it has not only software for the Antminer S9, but also for the T9 Plus and the L3 Plus and a few other versions of Miner on there. And the upgrade to that is pretty straightforward. Yeah, the upgrade to go from Brains and then over to a different third-party firmware is kind of tricky. So I'll talk about how I did that in a minute. The way tuning is done in the Awesome Miner firmware for the Antminer S9 is to tell it what frequency and power you want it to operate at, and then to use ASIC boost and reduce the frequency if there's too many errors on the board. At least that's the way that I found that works the best. And so it'll try to operate at that frequency, and if it gets too many errors, it'll reduce the frequency, and I think it also will change the voltage level on the boards themselves until you get to each hash board running at the right frequency and voltage to be able to work without errors. So that's a good way to do it. And that works well. And you can operate it, for example, I'm able to operate these Antminer S9 13.5s, able to operate them essentially at 16 terahash when you include the improvement from ASIC boost. And that comes in just under 1,500 watts. So that works pretty well, and a lot of the miners that I have are able to work at that speed. The problem is that I don't really like how you have to set the speed, and then in some cases it works its way downward, and I'm not sure if I'm getting the most that I can out of each miner or not. So I also tried third-party mining software from ASIC. These are it appears to me, the same group of people that do the Ethos operating system for GPU miners, and that's my go-to on the GPU miners. So I like ASIC, and they do a panel. They create a web panel that you can access anywhere, just like for your GPU miners as well. And so each of these, not Brains, but the other two, the Awesome Miner firmware and the ASIC firmware, you pay for using them. You pay on average about 2% of your mining capability is used to mine for the people that develop the software. Now, I figure if I can get a 10 to 20% improvement and only give up 2% of my overall mining capacity, that's a win-win for everybody. Now, I'll tell you, I like ASIC software a little bit better than the Awesome Miner software for 2 reasons. First off, there's a multi-ASIC installer. So you can just say, okay, you define your configuration for ASIC and then you run the ASIC multi-ASIC installer, and it goes through the networks and finds anything that it is able to upgrade, and it goes ahead and upgrades. Then it spends the next 6 hours auto-tuning, and at the end of about a 6-hour period, you have a panel where you have a bunch of S9 miners running the ASIC software that's optimized, and it gives you nice little warnings on the panel, maybe a fan's out on a miner, or it's too cold for mining. I got that one recently, and it tells you specifically what the voltage and frequency and power usage of each hash board is. So I like all the data there. It's a little maybe non-intuitive to create the configuration file, but I found it was pretty straightforward. The nice thing about ASIC is they've also got a tool to convert from the Brains operating system to ASIC. And as far as I can tell, what it does is it downloads the Bitmain factory firmware, puts that on instead of Brains, and then converts it to ASIC. Anyway, it works a pretty good process. In some of these, I found that for whatever reason on my data network for the miners that I haven't reserved IP addresses for, or even the ones that I have, it gives them new IP addresses. But I think sometimes some of these upgrades, it changes the MAC address of the miner itself. so that the DHCP server thinks that it's a different miner. Afterwards, you might have to scan the network to find the miners again. So I like ASICs here, the best of the 3 that I've tried. I do like the Awesome Miner for being able to manage and control the miners a little bit more granularly in a graphical user interface. So I wish that the Awesome Miner third-party software had the same ability as the ASIC seer does of just saying, I want this power. For example, I'll set my ASIC seer configuration to have each of the Antminer S9s use 14 and 40 watts. I wish the Awesome Miner software would do the same thing. Just tell it what voltage you want and it tries to, or what watts you want, and it tries to hit that. So anyway, I'm happy with that experiment, and based on that, I took some of my Antminer L3s and put the Awesome Miner third-party software on the Antminer L3s, and to get maximum efficiency on that, I turned the frequency down as much as I could. So I went from losing money running Antminer L3s to making money. So by being able to turn the frequency down and using the third-party software that optimizes for the different hash boards, I found that it worked really well. And I know that I can do the same thing with the ASIC seer software. So if I want to, in the future, run my Antminer S9s even more efficiently than they are right now, I could turn the power profile down from the 1440 watts that I have right now down to about, 800 watts or even less, and it'll run it at much higher efficiency. So these are the types of things that I'm doing to extend the life of my Antminer S9 and my Antminer L3 Plus to be able to operate in this lower Bitcoin and pricing environment. And part of it is that a lot of the hash rate that's coming on board right now is from much higher efficiency miners like the S17 and the T17. So in our minds, we're slowly transitioning over to the newer class of miners as well. Wish I had the funds to just be able to do a wholesale replacement, but after mining a few years and going through the ups and downs, I've got to be able to manage this transition slowly. I'm only buying a few miners at a time because I think the price is going to go down in the future, but I'm not really sure if the price of the miners is going to go down in the future. And I'm buying the most efficient ones, like the S17 Pros, because I think it's important to have some of the most efficient hash boards out there to prepare for the Bitcoin halving. Not buying any new miners to mine Litecoin right now, or anything else like that, but buying some miners here and there to mine Equihash, because I think both Horizon and Zcash are great projects to mine. So that's the big picture on the power and the third-party mining software. I know there's other third-party mining software out there. I'm not sure the differences between it and the ones that I've tried. Probably fairly similar. But I do encourage you to give it a try if you haven't done that already. Actually, one of the things I really liked on the ASIC seer is they support the Antminer T9. Not the T9 Plus, but the T9. I got some old T9s. After I put it on there, I was like, wow, not only does it improve the efficiency of the T9 hash boards, it also adds ASIC boost to it, because we had basically turned off those T9s because they're so inefficient without being able to do ASIC boost. Now, speaking of Ethos distro, which I did earlier for GPU miners, I didn't see that Ethos distro was getting updated as often. And what I found out a few months back is that if you go to your control panel for your GPU miners for Ethos distro, you'll see that there's third-party mining software that's available on the GitHub from Synex3, a third-party miner installer for Ethos. And if you haven't used that yet, I encourage you to, because a lot of the newer GPU mining software is much more efficient than the older GPU mining software, and you really need to upgrade. And it lets you, there's usually ones that let you mine some of the newer GPU mineable things out. Now, regarding third-party software for the Antminer S17 and T17, haven't tried any of that yet. I did try on one of them to do the Awesome Miner, the version of S17, it wouldn't upgrade. Maybe I was doing something wrong or something like that. But I'm certainly, I'd like to find out more about anybody that's been successful in using third-party software for the S17 or T17, and going to be giving that a try in the future. Now let's talk a little bit about power overall, because I'm throwing out a bunch of terms: voltage, amps, watts, things like that. It's pretty straightforward in setting up power. So I tend to use watts because that's the overall measurement that takes into account when the 12-volt DC voltage gets to the miner, it uses a certain amount of amps, and that translates into watts. But the power supply going into the miners themselves, that has a wide variety of voltage and amps that come in. So they're 1500 watt power supply, and when you're talking about AC electricity, you talk even more specifically about something called volt amps, and volt amps is different than watts because volt amps times the inductive power factor gives you watts. With the power supplies that we're using, they have a power factor that's very close to 1. So when we say watts, it's pretty close to volt amps within the margin of error, like 3 to 5%. So I just pretty much use watts interchangeably with volt amps. But I do know the difference. And when you're talking to the power company about the transformers that you use, they'll typically use the words volt amp. Now, the power that comes into the miners themselves, it can be anywhere from 120 to 240 volts. The higher the voltage you use, the less the current is, the amps that you're going to use. And it's better to use higher voltage because with less amps means there's less heat generated. You can use smaller diameter wire, which reduces your wiring costs. And the heat that is used, that's put out by the amps going through the wiring, by heating up the wires, it also reduces the efficiency. So you want as little bit of your energy coming into your building converted into heat in the power transmission and power supplies as possible. You want as much of that power getting to the hash boards on the miners as possible. So try to get as close to 240 volts as you can. Now, it depends on where you're at. So what I found works best here in the United States so far is to get the power company to bring in a 3-phase transformer, 208 volts AC phase to phase. So I find that works best, and then bring that to the individual panel boards and then just take phase to phase voltage and send that to the miners, and then make sure everything's balanced. Because whenever you take 3-phase and convert it to single phase, you want to make sure those phases are balanced, or else it affects your overall efficiency. And you don't really have a choice, because when you start getting larger transformers, all of them are 3-phase. Now, 3-phase alternating current electricity is much more efficient than single phase. And I've tried to have different analogies out there. But basically, single phase is a sine wave that oscillates at either 50 or 60 hertz. And 3-phase, it is 3 sine waves that oscillate at 50 or 60 hertz. But they're offset by 120 degrees. So a way to visualize that is, imagine you're riding a bicycle. So imagine a bicycle with a single pedal, just one pedal, and you're pushing that one pedal, and that would be single phase AC. Not very efficient, because you're only moving the bicycle forward when you're pushing down on that one pedal, and then it's you're waiting for it to come around. So a typical bicycle has 2 pedals that are 180 degrees out of phase. Push your left foot and then your right foot, and using the same type of bicycle, the same size chain, the same size sprockets, you're able to be a lot more efficient with your bicycle, because you're able to push it twice as much in one rotation. Now imagine if you're a 3-legged person that has a bicycle with 3 pedals, each set 120 degrees apart. This is where the analogy kind of breaks down. But single phase is like a 1-pedal bicycle, and 3-phase is like a 3-pedal bicycle. It uses the same wiring and it uses the same capability, but it's able to send more power through because it brings the electricity in 3 different phases. And the amount of power that you can bring in is 1.7 times as much in a 3-phase system as in a single-phase system. So the electrical wires calculated from the transformer to your electrical switchgear is calculated using 3-phase, and then in that you need to, somewhere in your system, you need to convert the 3-phase to the single phase to send them to the Bitcoin miners. Anyways, so 208 volts AC. The power company, they bring in their power, gosh, anywhere from 15,000 volts AC up to, I was just talking with some folks in a Latin American country. They're bringing the power in at 36,000 volts, and they have a 400 volt AC transformer. And so I think that's what's mostly done in Europe. So 390 or 400 or 415 volts AC. And in that case, like a 415 volt AC transformer, you can do phase to neutral voltage of 240 volts. So it's a different way of converting it once you get to your switch panels, but you're able to end up with 240 volts. And I think 400 volts translates to 230, and maybe it's 385 or something like that translates to 220 volts AC. But you definitely don't want to be higher than 240 volts, and you want it to be single phase coming into your miners. Now, once you get it to your electrical panel, then you need to get it to the miners yourself. And again, there's a few different ways of doing this, a few different styles. You'll end up having breakers, and these can be 20 amp breakers, 30 amp breakers, 60 amp breakers, and then you need to run that electrical wire to however you're going to do it, get it to your miners. What I prefer to do, what's worked best for me so far, is to do 30 amp breakers and take that to an L6 30R receptacle, and then buy $100 PDUs, power distribution units, that plug into that receptacle, and then give me 8 electrical connections that I can plug the miners directly into. I've seen other designs where people do wiring directly to outlets and line up 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 outlets in in parallel, anyway, together, so that they're able to plug directly in. And to me, attaching a bunch of outlets and wiring those correctly is a bit more work than just doing a single 30 amp connection and using a PDU. But everybody has a different style, everybody has different equipment acquisition costs, everybody has different types of workers and worker costs that they have. So it's all a matter of style regarding that. One of the nice things is, for the cooling fans, if you use cooling fans in your installation, then buy 3-phase fans, because as long as you're going to have electricity in the building or container that's 3-phase, then you can operate 3-phase fans. And 3-phase fans are more efficient and reliable than single-phase fans. So always go with the 3-phase fans if you can. In fact, if you're using single-phase and powering a fans, it has to create its own second and third phases, and it does that with start and run capacitors to simulate the 2 other phases. Don't simulate 2 other phases, just use 3-phase fans from the first place. Okay, so in my connection where I do a 30 amp receptacle, how much can I power the machines then? Well, if it's a 30 amp receptacle with 240 volts, that gets us about 5,800 watts. And you say, okay, well, if I do volts times amps, I always take that and multiply it by 80%. So when I say 240 volts and a 30 amp receptacle, my assumption is that the breakers and system is set up to use 80% of that 30 amps continuously, which is 24. You can go over that sometimes a little bit, but it's a good rule of thumb to do 80% of whatever the specified equipment maximum rating is, because with mining you operate everything 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the maximums tend to be calculated for not continuous operation. So anyway, a 240 volt outlet with 24 amps is about 57 and 60 watts, and a 208 volt AC 24 amps is about 5,000 watts. So use those in your calculations. Now, one of the reasons I'm looking at doing 60 amp breakers is that you can fit a lot more breakers in a panel, and then if I can get a custom designed power distribution unit that's 60 amps, I can directly wire that. And for remote installations, I've talked to some power distribution unit companies that will make them custom, and they'll make 60 amp PDUs that have remote control. So I could remotely monitor the actual current that's used in each outlet, and I could turn off and turn on the outlets themselves. So this would be if I was working with a customer that wanted to have just remote management completely and being able to do a hard reboot of any miners. Anybody that's mining knows that sometimes you just got to unplug the power supply, wait 10 seconds and plug it back in, and that's the only way to get it going again. This power distribution unit would allow you to do that. So, like I said, there's lots of different options for bringing power to the miner themselves. And from the sweet spot of overall transformers, it seems like if you go to about a 2000 kVA or a 2 megawatt transformer, that's about the right size here in the United States. Going above that, they're less common and less expensive. And a 2000 kVA transformer should be able to power, 1,600 kilowatts of power, or 1.6 megawatts of mining equipment. Anyway, so that's a discussion of the optimizing the power usage of your individual miners and bringing power to the miners themselves. For a lot of these types of larger electrical designs, I encourage you to work with a licensed electrical engineering contractor to do the designs, because some of this conversion of voltage and three-phase to single-phase and balancing power can get kind of tricky, and you really want to work with somebody who has done this type of work and knows what they're doing, so you don't have fires or explosions or other types of things like that in your mining installation. I'm going to post this both on the podcast and on my YouTube channel. If you have questions, please ask questions. I'm going to post this on my website at blockoperations.com as well. And just like always, I've got a business with a few experienced miners called North Georgia Crypto Mining, and we're happy to work with people in the form of doing professional consulting. We do have some hosting available right now, and come to our website and see what we got going on. And please reach out if you're interested in and have questions and have ideas for other topics. This is Block Ops signing off on the Block Ops Bitcoin and Crypto Mining podcast. Happy mining.